Okay, getting back to John Cupp, I did not know that he wasn't the preacher at St. Elmo. I thought he was already the preacher there, and I figured he
No.
might have started, come down and laying hands and saying, "Hey, we need to get the demons out." And so he wasn't yet. Was it? He a preacher? Wasn't he?
He was a preacher, but he was fixing to change over and start preaching at St. Elmo.
Okay, all right, and so see, that's what I remember. I obviously don't remember the circumstances. Obviously, I wasn't there, but when we started going to St. Elmo, I loved it. I mean, I thought it was great. We were talking about this not too long ago that back then it was Sunday morning, Sunday night at 6 o'clock, and then Wednesday night, and we made them all.
Yeah.
And I loved it. It was such a part of my life, which led me going to Board Buchanan, which is church across school, which was great. So you start going to St. Elmo, and so what was the significance of I mean, obviously you stayed, you and I mean, I've been off and on, at St. Elmo over the years, but this will be our 50th year at St. Elmo. Hopefully St. Elmo can continue to go on, but it'll be 50 years. So how did it change to where you stayed, like where you decided to keep going?
Well, like I said, the more I studied, the more I realized I needed to be in church, especially after I became a born again Christian. That was one of my commitments that I would be going to church. And the hardest part about that, especially on Sunday night during basketball season, I'd have to leave for the end of the Boston and the Laker game.
Well, it wasn't even that. We would have to leave at the what was it, the NFC Championship game the year that we left in the 49ers and Dallas were playing, and we went over, at that time as Melvin Dudley was a preacher, we went over to his house right after, and it was still on, and we got to see it. But you know what? It's funny as a kid because it taught me that wasn't a big deal.
That's right.
The church was amazing, and it made me feel great. There was a lot of great men there when we started. Who would you say, if any, that had the biggest impact on you at St. Elmo?
Well, it was Nick Gunn.
Nick Gunn, okay.
He was an elder there, and he's the one that, of course, at the time, I was just working, installing monuments, not making very much money, and he said, "You need to put that boy in Boy Buchanan." Well, and I thought as a member of Church of Christ and our elders being over us, that's what I needed to do when he said that, and that was the best thing that I could say that happened to you as far, and I believe that you need to have a Christian education because the public schools around where you was going to have to go, they were a little, they were too good at schools.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, as an adult and going through that, it always comes back to you about how you were taught. As we know in the Bible, you lead them up the way they should go. Hopefully, they're going to stay along that path, or at least come back to it. Now, like you said, you named yourself as a reprobate. Okay, let's say that. What changed once you started going to church? Where did you know what I'm saying here? Obviously, you went on to be baptized, but where did you feel a change in you as a person? Because it has to happen to everyone. If you've not been a part of the body of Christ, and then you come into where you're all in, where did you think the change came in? Where did you change into who you are? Well, I'd say who you are now.
Yeah, well, just your priorities. You quit letting the secular things, the material things, control your life. I know one of the things pretty soon after I become a Christian, it helped me. I used to have that '63 Chevrolet, and boy, I loved it. I was fixing it all up, and all this stuff, and we lived at a park down the street. Got up one morning to go to work, and I looked outside and it was gone. I thought, "Now, where did I park that car?" Well, come find out it was stolen.
Yeah,
and I mean,
I remember the morning. I remember what happened. Yeah,
it was a big thing, but it wasn't in a way. Before I'd been a Christian, it would have been just total disaster to me. I would have probably cussed and carried on and just, why is this happening to me? But I thought, well, I guess things happen and just do the best I can. Hope. Luckily, we had a spare truck or something but it just changed my whole attitude about things, lost and found. Things that I had didn't mean as much as they used to. The material things.
Yeah. Well, as witnessing, as only child at home, of course, and I was witnessing your journey along the way and saw you changing over time. You know, the better people you were around. I think, I think obviously you're going to church, you're getting involved with better people. But I tell you what, now I'd never met Granddad, but the thing I told my friends about you when we talk about our, fathers is that, and all my friends' fathers are gone. This is one of the reasons we're doing this. I have record of this. You're the last of the Mohegans with my friends' fathers. Is that there was a time when you hated if anything went wrong early in the day. You always wanted it afternoon because you figured, hey, close to bedtime, we'll go watch TV. But if something happened earlier in the day, the day was shot. It was nobody with the worst temper. And I'd be around my friends would complain about their fathers, and I'd get around them, and I'd like, oh no, you have no idea what. But over time, I saw a change. This to say, we talk about old people acting a certain way. Mm-hmm. And you would say, well, that they were just that way when they were younger, and a lot of people never change. I saw unbelievable change, and I always think it's God, because you always taught me that only God can really change your heart going forward. And so, of course, we worked, Rico Monuments, obviously, we worked hard every day, and the church was amazing, I thought. And over the years, preachers changed, things changed, of course. But I'm going to go on up here to your working Rico Monuments. Oh, go ahead.
Well, listen, talk about that, the biggest change. And see, a lot of times you forget how you really were before you become a Christian like that. Uh-huh. My father had the meanest temper. He had no patience. Of course, you saw a lot of that in me.
Yes, yeah.
And I remember, when he said, come here, he didn't want you to just come here. He wanted you to come right now, run. You run here. He carried a switch that he had, and if you didn't do exactly what he put that switch on.
Oh, that's right. You said he carried the switch like
a samurai sword.
Yeah.
And he could whistle. You could hear him for miles. If he whistled, you better come, and you come running. Now, I remember one time we was out doing death days, and I was so impatient, and of course, a lot of times, it was trying to make a living and everything, and we'd rent a compressor, go out and do death dates, and then maybe so it's going to start to rain, we'd have to hurry up and get through because you couldn't do them in the rain. And I remember I was getting on you one time, and I thought, wait a minute, I sound like my father. That is wrong. And that some of the things that come the easiest to me, I look back, was first, I had a foul mouth, cussed a lot. Especially when I worked at Kamala, the guys, the reprobates that I work with, they get to cussing, and I try to out-cuss them. It just seemed like that. What you do when people like that? And I had no patience. I look back, and I'm going to ask God to forgive me for the way I treated my helpers, because they couldn't do things fast enough, just like my father. So the easiest thing from that, I realized that I overcome the cussing, the easiest of all. And my temper, I've learned not to have a hot temper, be patient. And that has changed a lot to me and the way I think now.
Yeah. And you talk about it, though, but I never, because you only grow up what you know. So you were never abusive, ever, and nor was Mom. You're very strict. You always were like, hey, this is discipline. And because of, two things. I was never a hell, you never had a problem out of me. Right. But with some of the things I dealt with, anxiety and whatnot, I was in a perfect place, because when do I ever hesitate to get to work or go do something? Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying it was because I was, you had the switch out. It was nothing of the sort. But it instilled discipline and being on task. I think a lot of this generation could use more of that. Yes, from your personal, the way you looked at it, I think you thought your temper was bad or you were like your father. But trust me, on my end of it, I was like, hey, you lived it. Up early every morning. We were an hour early to any event. There was nobody there. Sometimes I question, I don't think there's going to be anybody here. But from my end, it never was taken like that. And I don't know how your helpers were. They might have different stories about you.
Well, what we were getting paid. I can understand why they were real enthusiastic about putting a lot of hard work into it. But that's the way of course, there was a time when I was sorry and lazy, I guess till I was about 19 years old. All of a sudden it clicked in because, my dad got on me because who wants to work in the fields? Who wants to do that? I mean, I didn't like that. But my brother, we both worked at the tile company, and he would get on to me because, he's the type that we do.
Talking about Uncle Joe.
Yeah, Uncle Joe. He'd get up there, and if he didn't think he'd done enough that week, he'd go on weekends, and like when we were out and tile and stuff, he would go and work free of charge to make up what he thought he didn't do. Well, and he'd get on to me a lot, but then all of a sudden, I don't know how, but it clicked in. I got to where I was that way.
Yeah, I must have got that from Uncle Joe because I do that on the weekends, or even if I think, oh, you could have went ahead and got that done, I'll go in and do it just because I feel like something was missed, and I'll start the week off behind if I do that. But Uncle Joe, he obviously was my favorite uncle because he thought I was amazing. Got a question. You know how many times I've lost count of when I was a kid and you called me Joe. I was so curious about Uncle Joe because I was like, why is he always calling me Joe? Where did that come from?
Well, I always getting on Joe or to say, Joe, do this because he's always getting on me. So it's just one of those things,
But it's interesting with the church is that I did not remember that. I thought that, John was already at St. Elmo.
No,
But the stories... Nick Gunn, I remember, and Nick died. Now that we're older men, Nick died very young.
Yes,
was he like 50?
Yeah, he is 50.
Yeah, he wasn't old at all. And look, at that time, I thought that was ancient. I remember the day you picked me up from Boyd and said, our buddy Nick died. And I couldn't believe it. But at the time, I thought, well, you're almost 60. You just, that's what happens with you. But I remember it to this day. But the impact that was made was unbelievable. And what was funny is I was sitting at church when the kids were about to go into high school, and they've been, were homeschooling them, and they had difficulties. And I was there, and suddenly this come over me at church that about Nick Gunn, and I was looking through, and something come over me, and that next week we put them both in, and just said they need to be in at least get some Christian school in them, and and maybe that will help along the way. So. But no, it was profound, and I always wondered of how they got you to go to church. I will say that I can remember I'm listening as a kid, and I'm like, he's gonna go to church. What I thought only good white people went to church. Why are we having to go to church?
Well, it's a true statement. A person would rather see a sermon than hear one. Yeah. They never preached to me. They showed me grace and tolerance over somebody that I don't know that I could have put up with.
Well, you were going to Lou. Here's the Lee Pharmacy. As we go out the back door, Lee Pharmacy to the left, Lou's on the right. So you would go to both. Lou's all the time.
And Lou's, it was something else. Yeah, that's where all the bad people.
Oh no, you took me down there. I loved it because they had a picture on the wall that fascinated me as. Old fat guys of Batman and Superman playing poker, at the table. I remember that. But no, I remember back in the day, and I wondered, I loved the people at the drugstore. It was amazing. And then the World War II veterans, the stories they had to tell. And of course, to me, some of them, like the one guy had lost his legs, and the stories he told about his wife being hard on him, about putting stuff out of his reach and stuff. And I went and looked at his truck where he had to operate everything, from the steering wheel. And they talked about it, and I can remember going back there and finding Time magazines and looking at all the old stuff, and I was thinking, man, these guys need to get over it. That was 30 years ago. And now when you get older, you're like, well, I remember, 30 years ago like it was yesterday. So I thought that was interesting. But I was always just amazed at how you ended up starting to go down there, because it's a great place to hang out. They don't have places like that anymore.
No. And Nick taught me a lot about human nature, especially church people, because he's an elder. He'd been in church all his life, and he had a heart attack before he died, and then he couldn't mow his yard, and I'd go mow his yard for him because I thought that was the Christian thing to do. That's what we would do, to take care of people. I didn't charge him. And on Saturday, he had a little farm up on Sand Mountain.
I remember,
cabin,
yeah.
And I'd go up there and bush hog, get on a little tractor and bush hog for him and everything, and we'd sit and talk, and he'd tell me about how some people are in church, how they were, and so you learn a lot about human nature and how you have to deal with certain things.
Yeah.
And that helped me mature a lot as a Christian.